Okay. So, welcome, Matt Donato from CyberSN. We wanted to talk about the recruitment process in cybersecurity, the difficulties in there, and what are the challenges, obviously. Yeah, Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you maybe start with talking a little bit about what CyberSN does?
Sure. CyberSN is a cybersecurity staffing and talent solutions firm. We've been in business now for 6 years. Our founder and CEO, Deidre Diamond, has been in the industry for close to 25, maybe upwards of 30. Our business is a diversity-focused firm that has offices throughout the United States and services companies, both large and small, in a variety of industries.
Okay, great. And I've read, or we covered on our cybersecurity magazine every once in a while. We hear that it's rather difficult for employers to recruit staff for cybersecurity. Why is that currently? Did it become worse during the crisis?
Yeah, the difficulty is complicated, but I think in its simplest form, I think the security field is very complex and it's changing dramatically. I think adversarial techniques, a lot of bad actors, a lot of threat vectors have advanced throughout the years. In addition to that, it's become monetized. So a lot of organizations, both private and public, have really had to harden their defenses. And by doing that at such an accelerated rate, the talent gap has just continued to widen. And systemically, we've just struggled, not only here in the States, but across the world, to really keep up with the training and the adequate resources that are needed to combat and defend the assets that the organizations have.
Okay.
During the crisis, it's hard to say. I think we're still trying to assess where things are, but obviously the workforce is more or less virtual right now, with the exception of a few essential people that are on site. But I think that's changed the dynamic a bit just because of the concentration on being remote, and the priorities have shifted a bit. But by and large, the focus, the mission of the organization is still the same, and that's really to protect and defend the organization, and just really use that security as part of their competitive advantage.
So wouldn't that make it easier, if I'm a cybersecurity expert, to get a job because I'm not bound to a certain location anymore?
Yes and no. I mean, I think economically, starting there, I think a lot of organizations are experiencing hardship, and so you're going to see less, budgetary support, allocated to spending on hiring. Having said that, I do think, and I'm a big proponent of seeing this kind of shift in the workforce of becoming more virtual, because I just think that's the time that we live in. We have the technology and the capabilities to be remote, to be decentralized. So why not have organizations start to hire talent that can be remote? I think by and large, it's been challenging when you're dealing with a supply deficit in any type of talent, whether it be security or anything else, to then force people to be, on site Monday through Friday during given hours, especially in large urban cities where the commute itself could take 2 or 3 hours. So logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. During this crisis, I think, again, back to my point around reshifting the priorities and a lot of people being virtual, a lot of infrastructure and technology departments, as well as security, have had to, obviously do a quick inspection on what folks have at their house, what they're using, to make sure that they're either accessing a secure VPN or that their applications are being run in the cloud and so on. And I think it's just had to shift their priorities. But most conversations that I've been having here, we are, 3.5, 4 months into the crisis, most organizations have done a great job of course correcting. And if they haven't, they've been exploited and exposed and have had to respond accordingly.
So what would you recommend for organizations who want to hire the best talent in cybersecurity?
Well, it's a good question and a loaded one. I would think at first, I think it needs to be a top-down approach. I think the executive leadership team, if you have a board, I think people need to be completely bought into the importance and the strategic advantage that it gives an organization. So I think from the top down, that leadership message needs to cascade throughout the organization and really support what that organization is going to do and their commitment to investing not only in the right tools and in the right processes, but in the right resources, the right people. So secondly, if that happens, given that does happen, and then the right decision makers, the right recruiting departments, et cetera, need to be really smart about where they look and who they identify for their organization, not only to align with their core competencies, with their techno-functional responsibilities, but also within their culture as well. And I think getting really crystal clear and aligned internally and really bought in is most important. And obviously the third one is using a smart staffing and search firm like us to be able to help you attract that talent. But I'll leave that cheesy sales plug alone.
Yeah, okay. So, and then on the other end, what would you recommend for cybersecurity experts looking for jobs? Would you recommend certain certifications, maybe qualifications?
Yeah, I think, obviously hands-on experience is the priority. I think, I think a lot of societies have become overly credential and education pedigrees, been very bullish on that for too long. And I think hands-on experience is what's going to give that practitioner equipped with the most knowledge. That tribal knowledge is going to be irreplaceable. But of course, education, specifically training and certifications, are going to give you that exposure, going to give you that knowledge, that I guess more or less academia exposure that you're going to need to be able to apply to your environment. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be the hands-on experience and getting exposed to some environments that are pretty sophisticated. You get exposure to advanced adversarial techniques. You get knowledge of really sophisticated tools. You get exposed to some really sophisticated processes, and then how to be able to make that work and apply that in a given environment. So again, tribal knowledge and experience, in my opinion, is kind of the leading factor. And then of course, the trailing ones are going to be the training that you have, the awareness, and of course, certifications are a part of that.
Now, you mentioned that, and I fully agree, that cybersecurity is a very dynamic industry. Not only because the security industry itself is evolving. I mean, there's new acronyms every day. Gartner just last year came up with the SASE, SASE acronym. Sure. But also, obviously, because the hacker community is also sort of upping their game in that regard. And don't you think, or how would you, what would you recommend for organizations in terms of training? Would you recommend to give their employees a good and sort of intensive training on cybersecurity as well?
Yeah, I think that's, absolutely. To answer your question, training and development, in every facet is critical, not only to your culture, but also to the personnel that you have in your organization. And that doesn't just mean training and development in terms of the functional areas within security. There's a lot of other areas, a part of the business, that they need to be trained on. I think security awareness is one of the top areas that we've seen really surface over the last 2 years. And that's not just within the confines of information security or within technology, it's organization wide. I mean, I think there needs to be barriers broken down, less silos in organizations. There needs to be more cross-functional training and exposure, education-wise, to what's happening in security. Insider threats are always one of the top 2 or top 3 indicators of where we see the most vulnerabilities. That's people, human error, and people clicking on, nefarious emails or what have you. So people that are more aware of that is going to be critical. I think organizations, if they buy in and they set certain time aside and budget aside to be able to invest in this training, there's a lot of organizations and networks to align with. I think CISOs should be collaborating with other CISOs. I think practitioners and subject matter experts should be collaborating and sharing ideas and telling stories about what they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're hearing. I think the more engaged and collaborative that community could be, the better. And there's a lot of conferences, there's a lot of organizations, not-for-profits, et cetera, that really do a good job of reaching into the community and helping you kind of get that exposure that you need.
No, that's a good point you mentioned, because even the CISO as a sort of function is a relatively new executive function, and if I look at other parts of the world, there aren't many CISOs even in big organizations. Security is often handled by the CIO, if that, and also if you combine that with the lack of security awareness. how big is the market going to be, and how or do organizations, how much do organizations need to catch up on security awareness?
Yeah, I think it depends on the size and the complexity of your organization. Of course, I would answer that question. Well, it depends. Smaller companies are probably less inclined to have a chief security officer, information security officer, but it also, if they're a software-driven business or a highly regulated business, they're probably going to warrant or need someone in that kind of position. Larger organizations, again, especially the highly regulated ones or the ones that have the most complex business model, probably behooves them to have a dedicated function. Now, whether or not that sits under the purview of the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, or not, is still being debated by a lot of people worldwide. And a lot of folks believe, and I too support the idea, that it probably should sit outside of the CIO's purview. I know that really wasn't your question, but I certainly wanted to mention that because that is oftentimes a point of contention in some organizations, and the conflict of interest, quite frankly, of where that role sits.
Okay. That's another point, because obviously larger organizations, they do have the resources to have a CISO, they do have the resources to have a dedicated security team, but smaller business, they usually don't have, they might not even have the resources to have one security employee among their staff. So one of the trends we've seen is that managed security services growing rather significantly. Is that something you see in the recruitment as well?
It is. We've seen a lot of the MSPs, the MSSPs growing over the last 3 to 5 years. There's certainly been a lot of consolidation and growth in that sector as well. I think there's a lot of them versus just being eyes on glass or eyes on your environment. There's been a lot more specific, niche subcategorized functions that fall into these MSPs and what they're able to do and the capabilities that they offer. Forgive me, my lights just went off here. Let me see if I can't get them back on. It's one of those motion detectors. But yeah, it's certainly something that we've seen grow over the last few years, as well as just that the whole community. If you can't have or don't have the budgetary resources internally, then you certainly need to leverage an outside firm or subset of firms to be able to help you and harden your environment and certainly keep watch on what you have.
So another question regarding that is what I heard from employees in the cybersecurity sector is that a lot of people are in smaller organizations. They would prefer working in larger organizations. But from my feeling, if you're in a managed service environment, that might give you a broader spectrum of knowledge, because you might not be reduced to just serving one customer, but you have a lot of customers. So what would you recommend for a cybersecurity expert? Rather go for the larger organization, because also obviously you have the chance of going up in rank, or would you recommend them to go to managed service because it gives you a broader perspective and a broader experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think obviously it's relative to the individual, what their targets, what they want, what they desire. I think both or all the aforementioned offer, they offer upside and downside. I think a lot of organizations certainly offer probably, theoretically speaking, offer much more mature environment, perhaps maybe larger budgetary support. There's probably necessity for a much bigger organization, thus allowing for more elevation, more talent development, more upward mobility, more options for you to go, from a career standpoint. But there's some chances of getting siloed and kind of pigeonholed in certain areas, quite frankly, if you're not careful, if your organization really doesn't do a good job of breaking down those barriers between the subcategorized functions within a larger environment. You look at a smaller environment and there could be a good greenfield opportunity. I know a lot of security leaders who want to get away from larger organizations and want to get to a business that's in dire need of standing up a program. And to them, that excites it. To them, that seems like it's a 3 to 5 year focus, and it's going to be a lot of fun to really harden their environment, to really get their maturity to where it needs to be. On the MSP side, certainly there's a more variety there. It just same thing can be said for management consulting or professional services. Again, it just all depends on what you're looking for personally and professionally. You know, MSPs have done a great job of diversifying their their offerings rather. And there's so many niches within security now because it's such a broad, sophisticated field that one of the criticisms of MSPs a few years ago was, you know, they only get 20% deep in terms of where they need to be from a specialization standpoint. They're not specialized enough, and a lot of them have intentionally tried to really mature, their subject matter expertise in certain areas like red team operations and purple team, et cetera, just to name two of many areas of specialization. So professional services on the consulting side is another way to get diversity in terms of clients, working with large and small businesses, various different types of environments, various different types of cultures, et cetera. Again, I think it all just comes down to what you're looking for. There's no real right or wrong answer. It just depends on what motivates you and what you believe is going to be most important for you long term.
Okay. And what do you see the trends in the cybersecurity recruitment area for the next 3 to 5 years?
The demand is only growing. So the trend is, simply put, is the supply is still going to be trailing and probably significantly. However, the talent does exist. People are out there. There's a lot of training programs that are really doing a good job of equipping the younger generation, folks that are coming into the market, or taking experienced practitioners in, say, technology or on the business side who want to get exposure to security and they're making career changes. So there's been a lot more investment there. There's been a lot more education, a lot more training. So I think that's going to help kind of close the gap. I certainly think systemically there's education at the youth level at a very young age. We've seen a lot of programs started, just as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. Those programs are really starting to capture some of the younger talent and equipping them with not only knowledge and how to use devices and technology, but in the importance of training. The importance of security and how that really impacts, or that might be a career field down the road. Colleges have done a great job. We've seen a lot of universities and schools invest a lot of money in resources and, quite frankly, capture expertise from both the federal government and the commercial sector, really getting those folks to invest in curriculum and academia, which is also another great area to capture talent.
Speaking of that, and touching back on the security awareness training, do you think it should be, well, not necessarily mandatory, but security should be taught at schools, even not starting at colleges?
Yeah, I absolutely do. The question there becomes: is it a undergraduate program? Is it a vocational 2-year program? Is it a graduate program? I think the simple answer is, all the above. It just depends on the level of education and exposure you're trying to get. But I absolutely do agree that risk management as a whole needs to be embedded into all of academia, specifically when it comes to business and making decisions and in the confines of technology, because it certainly is a large share of technology. Traditionally speaking, it's been about development and different types of programming languages and different types of ERP systems or CRMs and how to really drive top line. But it's hard to drive top line when there's impact on your bottom line because of breaches or because of compromised environments and such. So I definitely think it should be part of the curriculum from a very early age.
Okay, good. Thanks. I think that was a good insight into cybersecurity recruitment industry, and hopefully, or at least I heard a lot of good tips for both employers as well as cybersecurity experts when choosing their next job or the next employees.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.